Alright, ready?
Send it, boys.
Here we go.
I take a walk at night, hoping to feel that pain in my feet. Help but keep this feeling off of me, to making just one more day. I've been hunting for some time, trying to keep some frame of mind, trying to keep my toes to the line, trying to find the words to say. But my heart breaks just a little more every day, little more every day, in a million different ways. My heart breaks just a little more every day. I reach out sometimes, hoping that my fingers might find some kind of freedom that'll ride, something that'll show me the way. Oh, for the will I might find a way to make it through this night, find a way to make things right in a million different ways. But my heart breaks just a little more every day, little more every day, in a million different ways. My heart breaks just a little more every day. I done some living now, I done some leaving somehow, and I know that I've left scars, too many along the way. But when you look up at me, it's hard to tell you just what I see. Maybe the same kind of uncertainty, maybe I sense everything's gonna be okay. But my heart breaks just a little more every day, little more every day, in a million different ways. How many more times have I got to pay? How many more nights have I got to pray? How many more days have I got to wait? Hear you say, oh, a little more every day, little more every day, in a million different ways. Mine breaks just a little more every day.
Thank you.
had to get something off my chest. Wouldn't want you to see me as being just like all the rest. Can't seem to shake it, coming apart in between. Maybe this ain't just means too much to me. I've been waiting, debating what's on your mind. But I know it's the same thing I got on mine. Anyone would have given in long ago. What else is it you would like me to show? Oh, 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 oh. How did we find our way to here? Some things come through crystal clear, and I don't know if we have the same frequency. Want me to tell you just what you mean to me? Oh, 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 oh. If I didn't see you in a different light, if I didn't wish I could hold you with all my might, and if you can be true when you sit next to me, then how can you say that love comes naturally?
All right, shall we?
I'm going to do the clap thing.
Send it.
All right. Oh, here, yeah, the signature thing, right? Here we go. So.
That's the signature now.
I guess it is
We're
now,
just
yeah.
knocking it out of the park.
I made it into something on the commercial thing, so I started, maybe it's a thing.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
That's true. Yeah.
Chris, how you doing, brother?
Got yours on. Feeling good, yeah.
Yeah. And we've got Ann Shirley, our sister Ann Shirley. She is could not be down here this evening, and we miss her terribly. Ann Shirley, we will see you soon, no doubt. I think this Thursday. So in her place, we have our buddy Brett Brandstat. What's up, Brett? Well said. And then our special guest this evening, someone I have not seen in a couple years, but very glad to be seeing right now, Mr. Eric Drew. How
My
are you?
pleasure, Austin. Thank you.
Well, thank you for
very
making the
much.
trip down from Los
an
Gatos
honor.
this evening to be with us and to tell your story. And I want to jump right into it, honestly,
Sure.
but I do want to prompt it a little bit. As I was thinking, I tell your story often, actually. I do. And still you keep, tonight you've even hit me with more nuggets, frankly, of things I didn't.
There's a lot to it.
Either I didn't remember, because it's a bit of an overwhelming story. Like, there's a lot to process in your story. And so you may have told me some of these things before, and it didn't sink in enough.
Right.
But what really struck me as I was thinking back over it is that, to give some premise to it, because it definitely does not give any, it doesn't take away from your story to give some of this.
Not
in
at
the
all.
beginning.
Not at all. No.
You were diagnosed as a young man, around 35 years old.
I was in the prime of my life, 35. Yeah.
Right. And
Just
you
turned
were
35.
diagnosed with leukemia after having given blood, right? Or in the process?
It's kind of ironic. I was actually been going into the Red Cross to donate platelets. I was actually recruited on a movie set back in the 90s.
Right.
When I was working on a movie set, and they were doing a blood drive on the movie set. So I did a blood drive, and they go, "Hey, you're a big guy. You got this blood type that we need more donors for. Are you willing to do platelets?" In other words, you got to come in and you get hooked up to a machine, and they pump blood out of one arm and back in the other. And anyway, kids with leukemia really needed these platelets to stay alive. And so for probably 8 years, I've been going into the Red Cross monthly, or as much as I could, when I wasn't traveling for work or whatever, and donated platelets. And so I went in for my monthly donation to donate platelets for kids with leukemia, and that's where they first saw something wrong with my blood.
So you're diagnosed, and we'll take off again with this. You're diagnosed, and this is the part that gets me. You go to a leading medical institution for care, for
Yes.
treatment.
One of the best in the world.
And what gets me is you sitting across the table here from me. Now, I'm almost like 20 years later, almost, right?
Yeah, almost.
You are proof that the cure for your disease existed. You're proof.
It existed, yes.
Yet, this leading medical institution would not administer this treatment to you.
Well, it's even more than that. No, there was no institution in the entire country that had this available or would offer it to me at all. So
And yet, the cure existed.
it was there. Yeah.
The cure existed. Okay. So, with that, keeping that in mind, that the cure existed, Eric, start wherever you want to start, man.
Well, I think you already touched on the beginning of the diagnosis. So from there, I went to see a few doctors, and within a week from that appointment at the Red Cross was when I was diagnosed. But I was diagnosed on about 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. And when the doctor told me, and I said, well, wait a minute, can I get a second opinion? This can't be that, I want to make sure this is really going on. It wasn't just leukemia, but it was the worst leukemia you can have. Basically I had a cancer of my immune system. And a cancer of your immune system, it fills up your bones with cancer, and your body stops making blood. So, you die of hemophilia, AIDS, and anemia all at the same time. And he said, no, if you don't check into Stanford Medical Center tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you're not going to live the next few days. Like, you don't have time to think about this or figure it out. So I really didn't have any options at that point.
And so you immediately went in next day. Hello,
Next day. I'm
here. And they said, I think you said something like, if you had not come in at this point, you may not have lived another 9 weeks or something to that effect.
No, a couple days.
Couple days.
Yeah,
Sorry.
couple days.
Right.
Not weeks.
So then treatment begins.
So it took a couple days to do all the workups and begin treatment. But the part that really just crushed me at that point was, I'm coming in here to some of the best doctors in the world, some of the smartest minds in medicine in the world, because I'm relying on them to a couple things. I made assumptions that the medical industry is there to represent me and give me the very best treatment that is available for me.
Hippocratic oath, right? They're
But
there
that's
to take care
not
of
what
you.
it happens. That's not what happens. And so the other thing that sort of boggled my mind was when I got in there, they handed me 2 telephone book sized treatment protocols, which were full of scientific equations and medical terminology that I had no idea or experience with. And then they said, these are the 2 most aggressive treatments we have for your disease, you can pick which one you want to do. Are you
Choose
kidding
your
me?
own
I want to do
adventure?
the best one. I mean,
Right.
you guys are the
Right,
experts, right?
yeah.
I mean, why put that on, and what it is putting it on the patient to sort of, release them of liability. Well, hey, the patient chose that treatment or whatever, but, it's just a wrong thing to do. I mean, I'm starting to question, what are these guys up to? Why are they asking me which treatment I want to do? I mean, so anyway, that's what started. And I think within a week of initiating treatment, it was essentially the treatment I had was lethal. They call it ablative. In other words, they have to kill all your blood and bone marrow and literally kill you and then keep you alive on life support while you recover from that and then kill you again. And so you're living in those periods of time in a bubble where there's no human contact, people coming in the room. It's a positive pressure room so that nothing can come in and no bugs can float in or anything. And anybody that comes in has to be masked and gowned and all
You're
that.
totally neutropenic. I mean, you have no white blood cells. You've got nothing. You have no immunity. You have nothing.
You're living on a artificial immune system with antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals. I mean, just a cocktail of stuff coming in. And of course, you can't really eat. So, you've got, you're being fed nutrition intravenously. And I mean, you got two big hoses going into your chest, and basically that's your whole lifeline. Wow. So, anyway, it just within a week, I think I was given a medication that I found out later was a suboptimal medication, an older medication that causes a lot of side effects and can be dangerous. People can react to it badly. And, but it's cheaper, than the newer one that was available that was 5 times as much. So I ended up getting this medication. I didn't know any better, right? I don't know how to advocate for myself at this point, but I did have a bad reaction. My blood pressure dropped to nothing. I went into cardiac arrest. And just as my girlfriend, my fiance at the time, who was walking in to bring a movie for us to watch, walks in and she sees them doing CPR on me and everything. I woke up a couple of days later in the ICU and, at that point I started to realize I better figure all this out and start managing this because I can't trust, that I'm being represented, and the fact is that they do the best they can, in those situations, the nurses and doctors and everything, but they're on 20-hour shifts and they're running around. I mean, the nurses are on 12-hour shifts. I mean, it's just, they're tired, they're juggling, 50 patients. They got, you're being given a cocktail of 30 different, medications and antibiotics and everything else, and mistakes happen. And, unfortunately, medical error is one of the leading causes of death in the country, right up there with, cancer and, heart disease and other things like that. So anyway, I realized early on I needed to advocate. So after about 6-7 months of being killed once a month and then coming back and really seeing, where is this going, right? And then them sort of avoiding the point and everything else. And actually, I found out when I got to the next hospital I went to that I had relapsed about 4 months into the program, and they just never told me. They just wanted because they wanted to finish the protocol, right? Wow. Whereas if I would have known that this was going nowhere, and then at the end of 8 months of beating me down and bringing me back 8 times just to experiment on me, that you were just going to send me home to die, which is what they did, I wouldn't have stayed there, right? I would have been on to the next best thing. So anyway, I learned that lesson really hard. You got to really demand. You're the patient. You decide. You're the CEO. You got to make the decisions, right? And so it was hard. I mean, when they sent me home to die, it's like one of the top institutions in the world saying, there's nothing else we can do for you. We're going to arrange hospice services for you next week. And I went into a pit of despair. I mean, sure. I did. I was crying. I was just upset and everything else. And I remember talking to a young psychiatrist. This is one of the best, medical schools in the country with one of the best psychiatric programs. And I'm talking to a young psychiatrist and he said, Eric, if this is the last few weeks of your life, is this the way you want to be with yourself? Is this the way you want to experience it? And I think at that moment, I think I literally just went, you know what, you're absolutely right. If there's one thing left that I can choose is my own experience. And I don't think I ever got depressed, for the next 2 years of treatment. There was a lot of times where things got down, but I never let myself go into that deep cavity of despair.
Wow.
So,
wow.
And I'd also been, I just want to put an anecdote in there that I grew up in an amazing place. I mean, I grew up in the Santa Cruz Mountains in the 70s and 80s. And it was the center, Northern California is the center for LifeSpring, for the New Age movements, for the New Age thinking. Things that, some of the people I grew up with were teachers and philosophers in that.
Sure.
And so I've had mentors in my life, Martha Borst being one. She's just an amazing, inspirational coach and teacher, and one of the best in the world, published books. And so I've had those influences in my life. And then the other influences I've had are people that have just done little things with technology and everything, watching the Silicon Valley grew up around me.
Right.
Where, aunts and uncles and neighbors of mine and things, my parents' best friends, literally changed the world.
Yeah.
And so I always knew that, one, there's always a solution to every problem. And also that one person can change. As a matter of fact, every time something major does change in the world, it's often one person that initiates it, right? It's one person that causes it. All starts as the secret, right? It starts as a thought, starts as a intention, and then it manifests in reality after that. I mean, everything in this world started like that.
Absolutely.
That painting, that light,
Absolutely.
This microphone.
Absolutely.
So I had a lot of inspiration and a lot of support. So after 9 months and they sent me home to die, I contacted my half sister who I'd only met 2 years before. That's a whole nother story. How I was born in Corpus Christi, Texas, in the eye of a hurricane, but I was adopted by this great couple who, he was going off to Vietnam to fight, and so they adopted me to stay back with Mom, while he was off in Vietnam, and then grew up in this wonderful area. But anyway, I've known my extended family since I was about 20, and not my natural family.
Right.
And so I literally have 3 huge families and know all of them and keep in touch with them, and cousins and aunts and uncles and half brothers and half sisters, and it's pretty cool. But so this half sister that actually worked in the transplant unit at the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center in Seattle, which I view as the Rolls Royce of cancer treatment in the country. I mean, it was a whole different experience going from California to Washington, where the laws are much more liberal for the patient. They favor the patient. The patient, the way they treat patients was much more humane. And I remember the big difference being in the hospitals in California, the patient exam rooms were in the interior of a big building, right? The little telephone book size rooms with no TV, no art, no music, no food, no nothing. You're just sitting there and you're literally, thinking of the 30 questions you're trying to remember that you got to ask your doctor because your life is on the line. And this is the one time they schedule you in a month to see the person. And,
Right.
and then, by the time they get to you, they're 3 hours late. You're pissed off. You forgot everything you were going to ask. And I mean, it's just a terrible experience. And then you get up to Seattle, and it was the Fred Hutch was so different. I mean, all the patient rooms were on the perimeter of the building with the beautiful views and the sliding glass doors and catered lunches and satellite TV. And I mean, and the doctor's rooms were the telephone book sized cubicles in the center of the room with no windows and because anyway, it was about the patient, is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's a whole different experience.
Sure.
But so my sister basically got me up there, talked to the head doctor, said, I'll be a donor if possible of bone marrow stem cells. Can we get them up here? And they said, actually, we do have a protocol that he could qualify for. That's a haplo-identical protocol. So basically a half-matched sibling. And we're going to try transplanting the blood, bone marrow, and immune system, from one patient to another and see if that works, see if we can make that work. So I said, hey, it's a shot in the dark. It's better than just going home and dying. So I picked up my whole life. At that point, the Silicon Valley community that had been supporting me for, 9 months or almost a year now going through this, they started a whole foundation in my name, Eric Drew Foundation, Inc., which still exists, does business under the WeHeal Foundation now. But literally they went out into the community and put up Save Our Eric banners everywhere and put up Save Our Eric websites and raised about $250,000 in 6 weeks so we could put on the largest bone marrow registration drive that I've ever heard of. I think over 1,000 people came and signed up for the national database at that time.
Wow.
But they pretty much knew that I wasn't going to find a match doing that just because of idiosyncrasies in my DNA and my bone marrow. They knew I couldn't find a bone marrow match, and that's why they sent me home to die. They said the only cure for you is a transplant. You're not going to qualify for that, and so that's it. So anyway, packed up my life, went to Seattle. My mother went with me to take care of me, and went through 3 major protocols up there, including 2 failed bone marrow transplants. One using my half brother Michael that lived in Chicago, and one from my sister that actually worked at the center there. And then I did some other chemo and radiation protocols. But these are brutal. I mean, I said every one of these treatments is ablative. It's it essentially kills you and then brings you back. So you're just getting bounced around like a ball. Well, needless to say, my body started to suffer severely from all of these treatments. My bones started to die and started to go blind from cataracts. My nervous system was in incredible pain, burning pain. Some of the neurotoxic chemos that they gave me, caused permanent damage to my nervous system. So I was in quite a bit of pain at the time. My body felt like it was on fire. So anyway, I was running out of options and running out of bandwidth.
Yeah.
So the other thing that happened in Seattle, this is another whole big story in and of itself, but this is right back when, identity theft was starting to become a big thing.
I was going to bring this up too.
Feel free to jump in.
That's another big one right there. We might get to that one. I want to keep on.
Okay, sure. No, feel free to jump in at any time.
No. It's going. It's fantastic.
Hold me one way or another, because I tell you, there's more we can talk about in 10 hours. So.
Oh yeah.
But anyway,
this may just be episode 1 of Eric Drew's.
Yeah, you have this
this
entire table just wrapped at attention right now.
Absolutely.
So,
what happens next? A month after I get to Seattle, I start getting notices from banks saying, thank you for these new credit applications that you're submitting. And as a matter of fact, I'm the exact opposite. Before I left to go up there, I'm pretty much 100% terminal prognosis. There's chances of living through this are nil. So I closed all my bank accounts and just brought it all down to 1 and closed all my credit cards and just kept 1. And I actually pared down my finances, wasn't applying for more credit. So anyway, I thought it was very strange. And then more notices started coming in. And I called the banks and go, this isn't me. Shut this down. Whatever it is, it's not me. And by the way, my mail was coming in about a month late because my dad would collect it down here in California. And, once every couple of weeks, fly it up to Seattle when he visited. Because my mom was there taking care of me, but my dad was, had to work down here. So anyway, they started to become more and more, and I saw a serious problem there. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, this has happened just after I got here. I go, I haven't done any business in this city besides in this hospital. Somebody in this hospital stole my identity and is going on a shopping spree trying to open a bunch of credit cards in my name. Well, at first I complained to the hospital. I called the FBI. First I tried local, Seattle police, right? Hey, so I'm in a hospital here. Someone's stealing my identity. They're like, well, that's, first they ignored me for a long time. And then, several weeks later, I think it was like 2 months later after I tried to call them several times and file a complaint, they finally took my statement. But that was because I'd already gotten into the news. But that's, we'll get there. But essentially they just thought this guy's crazy, and I think some of them, if they called the hospital would say, yeah, he's a dying cancer patient here, and he's on a lot of drugs.
Right.
Sure. And I was in and out of consciousness, barely. I was sometimes barely alive, little less barely coherent.
I was about to say, during this whole time, you're being killed.
Back and forth, yeah. And literally,
let me just, now today that I can actually function well enough to press the buttons on the phone,
right.
I can make a phone call to try to figure out what's going on with what might be remaining of my life.
Right. And it got down to the point where I was ignored and placated. And, I launched my own investigation. I go, that's it. I've had it. And that was actually, so I had my second attempt at a transplant on Christmas Eve, 2003. And a couple weeks later, my dad brought the mail up. And it was a pile of dunning notices, not just thanking me for credit applications, but now demanding payments on accounts in my name. And I said, that's it, and I obviously I ranted and raved every time I went in for my medical. I'm in the hospital pretty much most of the day, but if I had recovered from the treatment enough that I had my own immune system, I could go back to the apartment with my mom and stay there. But yeah, I was in and out of, inpatient care. But sure. So I recovered enough to go back home, but my immune system hadn't recovered enough. So I was supposed to be very isolated and everything else. I remember telling him, look, that's it. I'm going to go, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to find this guy. So I had him put all this basically life support into a backpack with home infusion pumps and hook up that artificial immune system so that and literally I'm bald and gray skinned and I'm wearing a mask and everything, and I went out on the streets of Seattle and started asking questions at the stores where he was shopping, interviewing people, and putting together a case to catch whoever it was. And
while carrying your life support around with you
on a backpack, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the only thing that kept me alive was I walked back and forth a mile to the hospital and back almost every day, even through whenever I was not in bed, inpatient. I'd try to walk back and forth to the hospital to keep moving. And I think that kept me alive too.
Absolutely. That's, yeah.
Your body's a machine. You got to keep moving.
Got to.
So, anyway, long story short, after a couple months of this investigating, I had a case file this big. Nobody would take my statement. The only people that took my statement were the postmasters. They were really nice, because this was federal mail fraud. So I figure, okay, let's get a complaint somewhere filed, right? So
bureaucrats were exciting.
One time.
They were like, okay, yeah, we're postal investigators. We never get called. So
let's get this guy.
But eventually, it was an NBC reporter. So about a month into this, I started figuring, you know what? I had worked in PR, corporate PR, and so I started writing press releases, for immediate release. Cancer patients stolen by hospital staff. Mayor, so-and-so refuses to respond, and fax it to the Associated Press, the NBC, ABC news outlets, there was no Fox News then. It was ABC, CBS, and NBC. And then I'd send it to the local newspapers, and I'd send it to the Associated Press, and especially fax it to the mayor's office. I got an e-fax account, so I could just press buttons and fax it all over. And so I started writing press releases, every day that I was coherent or well enough to be able to do it, and burned everybody I could. Like, hey, cancer patient's identity being stolen by hospital staff. Chief of Police Gerlikowski refused to respond. I remember Gerlikowski because he became Clinton's chief of justice.
Oh, interesting.
Afterwards, not Clinton's, George Bush's chief, head of the Justice Department or something like that. So anyway, he was the chief of police in Seattle at the time. But I remember burning him and saying, hey, I remember him calling me and going, hey, I tell you what, we get a dozen calls a day of major crime. I'm talking $600,000 fraud, the money laundering, all kinds of stuff. We've got 6 people on the financial task force in the Seattle police, that rotate in investigators. I go, the total amount of money that guy stole on fraudulent credit cards in the city of Seattle is like $400 because most of his shopping was out and around the area. So they look at it, the local, I sort of understood this is a federal crime. This is really a federal crime. And, these are federal banks that are, negligently issuing credit to people and causing, they can protect us from identity theft.
Sure.
But they don't, because it would cost them more. It's all about the bottom line, right? It would cost them more to protect us than to just hire the lawyers and fight the lawsuits on the other side.
Right.
So anyway, the long story short is he finally, a news guy, Chris Daniels, NBC News, guess he had a slow news day, called me up and said, hey, I'm in the neighborhood. I was obviously up in the hospital sucking up infusions, and he said, I'd love to come interview you. So I said, yeah, please do. 5 minutes later, he calls me and says, you're in an immunosuppressed ward. They're not going to let us in with the camera crew or anything. So I said, wait right there. I'll be right down. I made him unhook everything and wheel me out of the hospital and interview on NBC News. And I'm just, I don't look like myself, right? I'm on prednisone, so I'm all bloated out and bald and gray, and I'm crying my eyes out going, I'm in here fighting for my life, and these people are stealing my identity and ruining any chance of a future I would have if I do live through this. And, I need to have something to hope to live for, and everything. And, it was my only identity I had left. I mean, when you get diagnosed with cancer like that, your whole identity as a human being that you've had your whole life is gone. I was no longer Eric Drew, 6'3", ex-runway model, quarterback on the football team, business guy, whatever. I was, Eric Drew, cancer patient, or actually more often referred to as patient room 272A.
Right.
Not
That's
even Eric Drew.
identity.
Who's
Not
Eric Drew? I don't know who that is.
It's patient 272A.
Sure.
So your whole identity is gone, and the only identity, I felt like I had left was my financial identity and who I was there, and that was even being stolen from me. So shortly after that interview, I started to get a lot more attention. I remember getting a call from a guy going, "Hey, I think I know who it is, and I've got pictures of him." And, if he matches pictures or whatever, but I got some pictures of him, and I live out on one of the islands, so I'll take a ferry, and if you meet me on the docks at 9 p.m. or whatever, I'll give you these. And my mom is like, "Are you kidding me? You're not going to go meet," I'm like getting out of this hospital bed, putting stuff on and putting a mask on. She's like, "You're going to go meet some stranger at the docks? It's probably the guy who did this. He's going to shoot you and throw you in the water."
Right, yeah.
And at that time, I just didn't care. I had nothing left to lose, right? I'm like, let's go for it. So you got something that could help me break the case? I'll go meet you. It turned out to be a false lead, but anyway, finally, after getting a lot of attention and everything, well, actually, what occurred to me was, right, I made my mother drive me. It's not rocket science to figure out where these cards are going. They're going to a house somewhere. Right. They're going to an address. Right. So I did a tri-merge on my credit report, found out what address was being used. It was down in, near SeaTac Airport and at a address on Martin Luther King Way. And so I had my mom drive me down there, and we took pictures. I'm sitting in front of the house with an angry scowl on my face, pointing at it and everything. And then I thought, wait a minute. Somebody's got to deliver mail to this house, right? So I found out what post office delivered mail to that zip code, and I went in there and I demanded to see the postmaster. I mean, I'm a mess looking, right?
Right.
I go in there and I'm screaming at him, going, "You're delivering." Okay, first of all, I called the owner of the house, and the owner actually was a manager saying, "Yeah, the owner of the house is in jail for bank robbery and murder for 30 years, so I'm managing the house, and I'm his aunt or something." And yeah, there's a lady there, and her name is Keisha Gibson or something, and she's she's living there with her 2 kids. So wait, I had a last name, Gibson. I had I knew the credit cards were being sent to that house. But anyway, so I went there, and I was so mad at the post office because, obviously, a woman and 2 kids are living there, and they're delivering like 30 credit cards to a guy named Eric Drew all of a sudden. I mean, doesn't that ring up, send up a flag, and doesn't anybody care? No, it's not my responsibility, right? So anyway, he goes, "I'll tell you what, though, I will not deliver another piece of mail in your name to that house. I'll forward everything to you. So tell me where you want it." And so I started getting all the criminal's mail. So I started to get all the statements, lists of where he was shopping, what was going on, and I remember calling all these places, and it was finally I found a Lowe's home improvement store that admitted that, yes, we have a camera. He was very careful to use places without cameras and ATMs with no cameras and everything else. But at Lowe's home improvement stores, yes, we've got cameras, but they're way up on the top of that big warehouse roof, and they're probably not very grainy. I go, I know, I want it, right? I want it. They go, "Come on, that was 4 months ago. We're gonna have to dig through all these cameras and everything." And anyway, I just basically harassed them until they did it. And finally, they said, "We're only going to turn it over to the police, though." So the only thing the Seattle police actually did for me was very nice. They went and picked up the video, and they brought it over to Chris Daniels at NBC, and Chris Daniels put it on the 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 11 o'clock news. And 30 people called in like right away going, "That's Richard Gibson. He's a lab technician at the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center. He's, also a professor of phlebotomy at the local junior college." And
wow.
Yeah. I mean, boom, we nailed him. So the police went to his house, and he didn't show up to work the next day, obviously. So the police went to his house the next morning. He went on the run. 3 days later, turned himself in with an attorney, and within 20 minutes, he was walking out of there. And I was like, "What? What do you mean walking out of there?" Well, again, it's it's this is a federal crime. There's nothing local police departments. They don't have the evidence. They can't get the subpoenas to look into the credit reports and actually get the documentation to prosecute somebody. So, it's just one of those things like, okay, now that we found out who he is, yeah, we're going to book him on a few things, but, not the major stuff that I wanted him booked for. So at that point, I said, that's it. This new HIPAA law went into effect at the beginning of 2004. I caught him like end of February, early March 2004. I go, "I've been signing this HIPAA paperwork, patient privacy this, patient privacy that." I said, "This is a federal crime. If this is not a direct violation of my patient privacy, then what is?" And so I started screaming bloody murder on, by this time, the news outlets are covering me and interviewing me and following the story. And it took a little while, but I called the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., called the Attorney General's office, and said, I demand this guy be prosecuted in federal court for this. And they couldn't really say no. They're like, okay, well, what's the law for if we don't, do something when people violate it, And they said, well, basically, it wasn't really meant to prosecute people. It was meant as a bureaucracy to start protecting identities. But, we're not geared for this. We never prosecuted anybody under this law before. And I said, duh, rocket science, you've got him on what? 15 different federal counts of mail fraud, forgery, identity theft. I said, look, I don't care about all that. I want to make a statement. I want there to be a first conviction here under that new law. And so why don't you just offer him a plea, let him go of all that other stuff, which is way more severe penalty than this. He pleads guilty to HIPAA and you got your first conviction, So anyway.
And all this is happening while you're getting bone marrow transplant.
I was. I
don't want to give it away too much.
Well,
but
I was basically recovering.
You were still very much in treatment.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, by this time I could walk around out without life support. My immune system had come back, but my immune system had cancer, so it still wasn't cured and fixed. Right. But anyway, so right about the time I caught him, and they finally, everything started to move, and the FBI finally called me. After I had called them a dozen times, they actually threatened me with a restraining order at one point, jokingly.
The FBI?
The FBI did.
Joking. I'm like, man, you better quit calling me.
Yeah, look, we're going to have to, quit calling us, quit bothering us. And so finally, they had to eat crow and call me back and go, okay, we're taking the case now, So anyway, a really Dudley Do-Right, really awesome. Jim Rogers was the agent, I think, on the case. And he was just, straight out of the FBI like playbook, right? I mean, just blonde, handsome, And anyway, he goes, "Look, we got to get this all on video because you're not going to be around for the trial." I mean, to be honest. So we recorded everything, and actually. They actually came out a couple times to record statements for me in the hospital and where I went next. But essentially, at that point, the Fred Hutch said, look, we've been through 3 main protocols here. There's nothing else we can do. And we got to arrange hospice care for you. And
so now number two medical institution has said,
yeah, and I by the way, in the meantime, I'm consulting at every major medical center in the country, right? I'm talking to the patient intake people at MD Anderson and Sloan Kettering and Duke and you name it, the top cancer centers in the country, and very quickly ran out of all. I mean, there was just nothing. People just said, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. So that was it. So I came back to California to kind of see my friends and check in. It was the first time I had been back in a while, and. But it was a pretty solemn time because, I'm still sick and I'm pretty beat up by this point and I'm still no solution. So I decided, before this, I had spent a couple years working around the world. I worked in Japan and Korea and Singapore, and I spent 2 years working in Europe based in London. And so I had a heck of a Rolodex of very, high level, Fortune 500 executives throughout Europe. And so I put together an email and sort of summarized my case, and I guess it was a crowdsource, right? I said, I'm going to throw this out there and see if I can crowdsource a solution by asking all these executives to do me a favor. And we worked together at one point. You knew me at some point. We're not close friends, but I got a favor to ask you. Please find the top hematology transplant doctor in your country and get this case to him and ask him what we can do. And so I threw it out there like that. And it was literally within 2 weeks of doing that, it was a Swiss doctor from Geneva who was moving to the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland to start a program doing what he did. But basically, he and some Italian doctors had figured out that, wait a minute, bone marrow is simply a source of stem cells. Right. And if you don't have a bone marrow match, because these are adult immune systems you're trying to match, very difficult. There's other sources of stem cells that actually could work much better. And so they had tried using umbilical cord blood from newborn babies back in the 90s, and they successfully transplanted some very small children. But anybody, over 100 pounds, it just didn't work. And so these guys figured out brilliantly that this is just a volume issue. One little baby's cord blood is not enough to seed an adult body, especially a big guy like me, 225 pounds. So, but if we use 2 or with somebody your size, maybe even 3 cord bloods, not only does it work, but the fight between the immune systems for the possession of the body, which they call in medical terms engraftment, the growing of the new system in your body, into your bone marrow, actually it facilitates it because the different immune systems are fighting each other to gain control, right. I'm going to grow and be the stronger
immune
one,
system
right?
needs to do, right.
They had found the Swiss doctor, they did a search and they found a matching cord blood sample from a little baby girl that had been frozen for 8 years that was in this little dank basement of a 500-year-old building in Milan, Italy. It had been sitting in in the corner, in a dark corner in a tub of liquid nitrogen, but it was put into a database, and they did a database search, and it matched my DNA. And they agreed to hand carry it to the U.S. if my insurance would pay for it and things like that. And at that time, I had an advocate within Blue Cross, and I must say, Anthem Blue Cross, they saved my life. I mean, they went above and beyond. I mean, I figured out what I wanted to do with this treatment. I literally packed up my stuff in Seattle, called the landlord of the apartment, said I'm leaving tomorrow, and me and my fiance got in my truck and we drove to Minnesota to the hospital that agreed to do the transplant. And on the way, I called my insurance company and said, I decided I'm going to do this crazy experimental stem cell transplant in Minnesota, and I need you to have it approved in 3 days by the time I get there. And they made it happen. So,
wow.
It was pretty awesome. It's not, they kind of knew I was a lost leader, they were gonna make any money on me, right? I mean, this guy, because I'm in the news and I'm, I told him, I said, if you guys deny me treatment in any way, shape, or form, I will be on your doorstep in Ventura, California with a camera crew, and I want to interview the people that are sending me to home to die and refusing to let me get my treatment. So anyway, they didn't mess around with me. So I drove out there, spent 4th of July at Mount Rushmore, and then drove all the way to Minneapolis and checked into the hospital, and they hand carried all that was the hospital that I chose. There was only two hospitals in the country that are just starting, these transplants using umbilical cord stem cells on adults. One was Duke and one was Minnesota. Minnesota would have done 2 transplants before me. Duke, I would have been the first. So I said, okay, I'll let you guys practice on a couple of people first, and then I'll go there, right? But I mean, they're in Minnesota. They're affiliated with the Mayo Clinic, and it's actually the transplant center was in the Mayo building, and so anyway, I felt comfortable there, and I went for it. So it was crazy. There was some up and down times. I mean, literally, they told me, they said, this is going to be more chemo and radiation at one time to get you ready for these baby cells, because these baby cells need an absolute clean slate. I mean, not one existing immune cell, blood cell, anything in your body. So we're going to do 4 days of just heavy chemo doses, flushing your body with chemo. And then we're going to go in and have you just put you in this room and zap your entire whole body radiation for like 15 minutes with millions of rads, anyway. There's no way you're living through this.
So I've seen people in chemotherapy and radiation treatment. Of course, many of us have. I went through it with my mother and my stepfather. Mm-hmm. And it absolutely tears you down. It breaks you down. They're poisoning you, severely poisoning you, right? They're killing you.
As your cells
by this point, in your head, what was this even like to you anymore? Did you feel anything anymore, or was it just another day? Were you just numb?
No, it was still experiential. I mean, it was very spiritual for me in a lot of ways. I mean, I had people. I had prayer chains going on all over the world. I had prayer chains going on. I had a sister-in-law who was Thai, and they were living in Thailand at the time with my half-brother, and they started a prayer chain at their temples in Thailand. And I had people. I worked with a lot of Israeli companies, so I had them putting prayers in the wall in Jerusalem for me, and I had mosques in Central Africa, the friends I went to college with who started prayer chains at their mosques. And so I had like a shrine of religious tokens and artifacts and symbols that people had sent me from all faiths, all all spiritual backgrounds, and it was in a lot. I went through. There was a lot more than I can talk about now, but I can talk about some of the experiences. I mean, there was one time when I was 2 months out of the transplant, and still my body was in really bad shape, barely recovering. I mean, they told me that I probably was not going to live through this. It was going to be too much. I'd already been through too much before, but that if I was willing, they would try. And they said, if there's a miracle that you do live through all this 3-month process, then we think we can get these cells to grow in you. So it was a Hail Mary. It was a shot in the dark, but not a long. It was a long shot. But 2 months into it, my body I've got blood clots and my legs are swelled up and purple.
I've seen that picture you showed me. That was incredible.
Bad,
yeah.
And I hit a fever at one point of like 106.5, and I had 5 or 6 bloodborne infections. I had funguses growing in my lungs, candida and everything. Because my body had no immune system, so any exposure to any pathogens was just critical. But I had bloodborne infections, bacteria, funguses, everything, and my temperature shot up. They were packing me on ice, and they brought in the chaplain. This wasn't the first time they brought in the chaplain, which is a sign that they don't expect you to live through the night or even the next couple hours. And but this one particular experience was a pinnacle. I was on so much morphine and steroids and everything else that my mental experience was kind of like living in a dream. It was like a dream state, and I was hallucinating and in different places and things, but there was always some point in the real room or in the real experience that was still present. So this one time during this fever, they were packing me on ice, and my body was on fire. I mean, literally, if somebody were to cover you in gasoline and just light you on fire, this is what it would feel like. And my experience, my reality at that time was I was hanging onto the middle of Half Dome in Yosemite, just that sheer cliff with 2,000 feet above me and 2,000 feet below and 1,000 feet each way. But my muscles are so tired, I'm so exhausted that I can't even move an inch. Like all I can do is just hold on. And I was naked. It was during a winter storm. The winds are whipping. Ice is just burning my body, and made sense. They're packing my body on ice, and I was feeling this burning, whipping pain. And at that point, I just literally, the only thing that I could still sense in the real world was the clock on the wall across the hospital room from my bed, and I could see the second hand going. And I got to a point where I had experienced my life flash before me, and then again, and then I'd say, okay, I just hung on for a minute. I'm gonna, you know what? If this is the end, okay. And to me, there was no way out of there. How was I gonna get out of there? I'm on this cliff. The only way out is to let go. And you know what happens when you let go? And so I said, well, I'll just hold on for another minute, or maybe I'll just hold on for another 30 seconds. And the pain became a sign that I was like still alive. It wasn't pain anymore. It was just experience. And I remember something a lot bigger than me talking to me. I'd had that near-death experience before, and saying it was all right to let go. And I think my experience was different things, but I know that my mother was in the room with me telling me that it was okay to let go now. And I think I'd fought a really strong fight, and nobody would have faulted me for letting go. But for whatever reason, I just never got to a point where I let go. And
30 more seconds.
Yeah, 30 more seconds. Maybe I'll let go in 30 seconds.
Were you consciously watching the clock at this time?
Yeah, I can see.
So like you're literally just sitting there thinking like, I'll wait until it gets to 6.
Yeah, wow. Maybe, I'll wait to see where it gets to 6, and then I'll decide if I hang on again, And I went through these processes of reliving my life, and I was there at my own wake, my own funeral, and saw all the faces and saw the emotional reaction of everybody in my life. I mean, hundreds of people, my family and friends, and everybody that had been following me, and all the patients that I had been helping with the foundation and everything. I saw it all happen, and so I just kept waiting and saying, I as long as I'm having these experiences, these pleasant experiences, and why not hold on and have some more of them, right? I knew there was no way out. I knew eventually that I would let go. So all of a sudden, I wake up, and it's it's like 2.5 days later. And what had happened is they had to give me an infusion, and because my body was in such bad shape already, the slightest reaction from the infusion, allergic reaction, would have killed me. So they gave me 50 milligrams of liquid Benadryl, and it just knocked me out. So I essentially went into a sleeping coma. And when I woke up, the infections had cleared, the temperature had cleared. They said I remember my mom and my fiance saying my eyes were bright, and I just kind of looked around the room in a daze and went, I'm ready to go home now. Like I had been 2 years in these hospitals and fighting. And I knew at that point that I crossed over. I'm done. I've made it, and that was the pinnacle. So,
wow.
There's a lot of psychedelic experiences and everything in the meantime going on. And, I remember being visited by angels and people, and I didn't really know if these were real people or angels that were visiting me, because to me it was just all like a dream, And I remember one angel that I remember visiting me all the time, and it turns out I didn't know for years after. And I went back to the hospital a couple years later, and I was asking, I'm going, I had this experience of this guy that would come in and talk to me, and just, in my sleep. And anyway, they go, yeah, that was so-and-so. He was a volunteer that used to come in and sit with you throughout the nights and talk to you. And I mean, that kind of stuff is just amazing, that there are people that do that just volunteer to go in and sit with patients when they're, on their deathbeds, and just talk to them, and, have these delirious conversations and things like that. That to me, it was an angel that was visiting me, in my dreams. And it turned out that one was actually a real person. But crazy stuff. So here I am. I'm ready. I'm done. I'm ready to go home. The Gibson guy's being prosecuted. They start coming in. I'm on. Next thing I know, I'm on CNN morning show, and Montel's calling me to do the show, and Donnie Deutsch, and it just all started to kind of take off from there. But yeah, crazy adventure. Crazy adventure. Little did I know the adventure was just starting. But yeah. Life is just one long big adventure, isn't it? That
it is. And so out of this experience, to jump around just a touch, because I want to get to what you're doing now.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. You not only are we sitting here with the longest living or oldest living survivor of stem cell transplant in the country, is that correct?
Not stem cell transplant. So, if you think about the bone marrow as a source of stem cells, they've been doing bone marrow transplants since the 60s.
Okay.
But I am probably the oldest surviving adult that has had a umbilical cord stem cell transplant.
Okay.
From the umbilical cords of newborn babies. I don't know that for sure, but I know that the patients that were ahead of me in the U.S. did pass away, so they didn't make. I was the first one in the U.S. to make it, and I don't know, because it's the HIPAA and patient privacy. There's no real tracking of that stuff. But I was only patient number 3 or 4 in the U.S., and so there wasn't many before me anyway.
Wow.
But I was 30. Let's see, so 34. What was I? 37 at the time I got the transplant finally, and now I'm 53. So
I was about to say, I got to celebrate your 50th birthday.
Yes, you did. A couple years ago, you were there.
That's right. So then the HIPAA case,